Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are when I read a chapter and correct as I go along. I do these live every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. on Twitch, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, should you want to listen to them live. Today we are doing chapter 17 of Bottom Rung. The meal, after the stop at each of their training tent for a healing potion, wasn't the jovial experience they'd hoped for. In dividing the coins, they'd forgotten about the 10% the guild took, so it shorted the team of 17 coppers. Because the guild didn't deal in broken coins, they needed to hand over a full one for the half Zarkane said they actually owed. Tibs was the only one surprised by it. When he'd mentioned breaking a copper piece, he'd receive odd looks. With another comment from Jekyll on how straight Tibs was. Walter had handed over half his stake, which brought the mood down further, but the sorcerer pointed out that he only had 43 silvers until he was free of the guild, and it helped everyone feel better. While they ate, Tibbs got Zarkane to help him work out how long it would take for Walter to pay off the amulet. And she figured that if no one helped him, and the number of coins was the same each time, he'd have to hand over 1 silver each run, so it would take him 43 runs. The number was too large for Tibbs to understand. So she explained it as close to a year and a half if he only had one run every 2 weeks. Would Walter outgrow its use by that time? Could he outgrow it? Another question to ask Alistair. There was so much he didn't understand. What should we do? Walter asked as Tibbs cleaned the bottom of his bowl with the last of the bread. Stew. Tibbs hadn't known mixing vegetables and meat could create something so delicious. Now he regretted not having spent coins on a meal at the inn sooner. Going back to the slop at the mess hall would be difficult. Tibbs raised his tankard, noticed it was empty, and put it back on the table. Now that we can make good coins from the dungeon, I think we need to assess what the merchants sell and which ones we can trust to give us a good deal. How do we do that? Claudia asked. The trust part, I mean, I'm guessing assess means looking at what they sell. We ask about price, then we compare with another merchant who sells the same thing, or close enough. Right, Tibbs? I never trust merchants. All they want to do is beat me. Jekyll chuckled. This isn't the street. This place is too small to have. This place is too small to have a street. No merchant's going to beat you here. We're too important. Without us, they can't make coins. Tibbs wasn't sure how confident he was in Jekyll's explanation. The merchants he'd interacted with in his first days here seemed plenty interested in beating him away, but the man had been right about a lot of things up till now. How do we decide who sees which merchant? Zarkane asked. I mean, we probably want to pick one that's going to sell something we know, but in my case, unless the sign has a bow and arrow on it, I'm not going to be able to tell if they sell something I know. I don't know my letters. Same here, Jekyll said with something like pride, and Tibbs felt better knowing he wasn't the only one, that even older people didn't always know their letters. That's why most of them will have signs with drawing on them. But what they sell doesn't matter at this point because after we've compared what and how much, some someone different will go there with the accumulated information and see if we can talk them down to something we can afford. I'm better at stealing than talking, Tip said. Jekyll smiled. Noted, but you can't steal here. We need you to keep both hands. As for which merchant, we'll split up in different direction and just enter them. As I said, it doesn't matter which one right now. Which was how, you know what? Which was how Tibbs ended up standing by a door, looking up at a banner over it with a shield, knife, and a rope depicted on it. Underneath were letters, but he didn't know them. The building was recent, one of those he hadn't had the chance to climb yet, fresh wood planks without marks on them, not made by the tools to build it. Tonight, he promised himself, he'd see what the town looked like from this roof. Welcome to the Shield and Rope. The man behind the counter greeted Tibbs as he entered. where you'll find the best equipment an adventurer might want. Tib's hopes crashed. He couldn't afford the best. None of them could. Tibs considered leaving to try a different merchant, one who didn't sell the best. The man stepped from behind the counter. He was rotund and not very tall, dressed in layers of fabric. Tips could imagine hiding all sort of thing, all sorts. Let me guess, it's an S you want. Yep, all sorts of things like tools and knives. The man paused before Tibbs and studied him. Would you be a thief, perchance? Tibbs got his desire to run and held it in place, remembering Jackal's word. This wasn't a street. If the man had asked if he was a rogue, Tibbs wouldn't have worried. Rogues worked for the guild, he knew. Thieves were criminals. He searched the man's face for some clue as to what answer he wanted, but all he saw on it was pleasant curiosity. How often at such, wait, I had often at such been followed by a beating? Was it better to be caught lying? Tibbs missed the street. Things were so much simpler there. I was? He said, unable to stop the uncertainty from sounding. Was? The man asked, his expression not changing. No beating had to mean this was a good direction to be in. I'm a dungeon runner now. They classify me as a rogue. The man's face brightened. What's in a name? He shook Tibbs' hand vigorously. The important thing is that you are following the path of the light fingers. Tibbs stifled a groan. Was he ever going to get away from that moniker? Too few follow that path. Everyone needs a good thief or rogue, he added with a mischievous smile. He motioned to the counter and shelves. Now, do keep your hands to yourself while I give you a tour of my wares. He lowered his voice, and I do carry the best in anything a good thief or rogue might need. Again, the best. But now Tibbs felt bad leaving, so he followed the man to the counter. The counter he'd stood behind. You know what? So he followed the man to the counter as he pointed to this bedroll, those oils to make the leather resistant to water, that cloak that would keep you warm in the cold months. The man didn't sound like he wanted Tibbs to buy anything. He was just enumerating what was there. This was so different from what he'd seen done on his street. Once behind the counter, he took a metal box from under it and, carefully looking around, unlocked and opened it. He took out a leather roll and unfurled it on the counter. And unfurled it. I don't need to say on the counter. Tibbs forgot about everything else in the shop. Picks, large and small, were on it. He'd had to make do with an old length of metal he'd found off a cart with a tension bar, and a piece of bone he'd rubbed until it was the right shape for his pick. These were gleaming metal. The tension bars were in multiple sizes for different locks he'd seen on the doors, and the picks had different ends. Having the right one for the right lock he needed to pick would make entering so much easier. And some were thin enough that if he had to, he could use more than one. How easy would his life have been if he hadn't had to worry about tumblers falling out of place as he worked? I see you recognize the value of a good set of picks. A set? Was he drilling? This was a fact-finding mission. He could indulge in something that would help him, and only him, later. And he reminded himself, did he really need picks now that he had his element? He forced himself to look away. I'm more interested in the armor, he said, his eyes flicking back to the gleaming polish of the picks. What did it matter if he needed them or not? They were beautiful. The man chuckled. Of course. You wouldn't want me to know where your interest really is. Tibbs sighed. I'm kind of new at this. He motioned around them. All of this, he added for emphasis. I completely understand. After all, you are the youngest customer I've had, here or elsewhere. The man's demeanor changed as he rolled the leather. He was utterly serious. And I also understand how telling it is. You survived not only the street they took you from, but the dungeon long enough you can afford to visit my shop. He put the box back under the counter, and when he straightened, he was his jovial self again. Now, my armor is the very best leather. I have stronger armor. I'll have stronger armor eventually, but it is too early for it to be worthwhile. The dungeon doesn't give enough rewards yet to someone to afford bended brass and offers enough of a challenge to justify buying that kind of armor. Not that I expect you'll care for metal, even if things get more difficult. As a thief, you want flexibility over toughness, to stay light on your feet as well as your fingers. Surviving a hit is all well and good, but it's better if you're nimble enough not to get hit in the first place. He pulled a chess piece from a shelf. Due to your stature, I'd have to make modifications so it would fit you properly, but I wouldn't charge extra for the work. Tibbs indicated the leather legs and the shelf where the piece had been taken. You sell legs too? He noticed another set shelf had boots and gloves. And helmets, the man smiled. Young man, an armor isn't particularly useful if all you have is one piece of it. I sell it as a full set. The individual pieces are here so you can try them on. Although I will sell you pieces if one is damaged beyond repair. But I don't think you're there yet, just yet. How much of a waste of time was this? Was the how much of a how much of a waste how much this how much this was a waste of time sunk in even more. If the guild had offered a chess piece for 50 silver or more, since he couldn't imagine a knife cost the same as the chest, and they were giving them a special price, just how much would a full set of better armor cost? He took a breath and asked. He couldn't go back to Jekyll without a price. How much? He readied himself for the answer. A set like this, which is basic, I sell for 40 silver. Now, for you, yes, I promise my prices are reasonable. The man stopped and looked put off when Tibbs shook his head. 40 silver sounded a lot like 50. How could a full set cost how could a full set cost close to how much the guild charged for one piece? Or did the way it sounded have nothing to do with how close they were to one another? Jekyll would know, so it didn't matter, but he was curious. How close is 40 to 50? The man's annoyance changed to surprise, then realization. Of course. How stupid of me to expect you to know your numbers. How high can you count? Tibbs reminded himself that Jacqueline's arcane didn't know their letters, and the man seemed to understand. 10. The man smiled. Then you're set. Numbers work in set of 10. Do you know Do you know your letters? No, of course you don't. Okay, think of it that way. Each set is linked to the first 10 numbers, and except for 10, which I don't understand why they went with that, each set is made from the sound of the number it corresponds to. The first set is the first set is the number you know from 0 to 9. You pause. You know about 0, right? That's for when I have nothing. Good. So that's the first set. The next one starts with 10 in the position of 0. You tag the number to it, and after is 10 is 10-1, 10-2, 10-3. Emotion for tips continue. 10-4, 10-5, 10-6. Perfect. Now, after 10-9, you have to 0. Tibbs said, figuring he had it. He did say the 10 was odd. The man looked at him. You know? That would make so much more sense. But no, it's made to sound like 2, but a little different. 20. He pronounced it slowly. Now, before you worry too much, if you say 2-5 or 3-8, you will get odd looks, but they will understand what you mean. Tibbs rubbed his temple. Hadn't he come here just to see if the merchant had good prices and could be trusted? He didn't know about the prices, but if the man was willing to go through all this so he'd understand how much what he sold was worth, Tibbs thought he had the trust part down. It's a lot, isn't it? Tibbs nodded. I miss the street. The man laughed, and Tibbs found himself smiling along. That won't last. But for what you ask, you just need to remember that the first part of the number is made to sound like the original set. So, what does 40 sound like? 4 and 50? Tips had the number in his head. 5 is the closest. And where are they in relation to each other? 4 is below 5. Understanding came and he gawked. The merchant was selling him a full set of armor for less than the guild wanted for a chess piece. He fought to keep the suspicion from showing, wondering if the time helping him understand his numbers had been to create a sense of confidence he'd then take advantage of. Except, what was Bardic had said about the people in authority and trust? It sounded like he spoke about the guild at that moment. Hadn't Alistair sounded annoyed when Tibs had told him about being free at Epsilon? That he'd been told the same? As if the guild had lied to them both? Was it the guild that was swindling them and not the merchants? What if I don't have 40 silver, but I expect that without the armor I won't survive to get the coins? To get those coins? What can I do? The man's smile became tinged with pride. You have a sharp mind. I do offer a competitive payment plan of 1% per year with a minimum expected payment of 1 silver a month. I can make allowances since the guild decides when you go in and not you, and that means you can't be sure if you'll go often enough. Although it looks like your numbers are low now. You should be well, don't care. Although it looks like your numbers are now Oh, I now low now. Are low now. You should be going at least once a month. Tibbs nodded. As a rogue, he'd been in at least once a week to fill a spot. But that only matters if you decide to buy from me. And I do have an armor set specifically for thieves. Tibbs didn't reply. He was trying to understand what 40 silver meant. Now that he had a sense of what 40 meant, if it was 15 copper to a silver, then what's 15? The merchant looked confused, then seemed like he didn't know if he wanted to chuckle or groan. There, young man, you are falling under the local dialect rule of language. Wait until you are confronted with an entire different language. Tips tried to articulate just how confused that explanation made him. 15 is the same as 10.5, the merchant said. 40 times 10.5 was too much for Tibbs to comprehend, so he decided he wasn't going to deal with that right now. What if my entire team wants to buy from you? All thieves? The man asked, unable to hide his eagerness. 2 fighter, an archer, and a sorcerer, plus me. I guess sorcerers don't wear armor, do they? I do have sorcerer's robe. He headed for a shelf and pulled a large box from it, lifting the lid to show Tibbs the content. The very best wool with a tight weave. This model doesn't have them, he said after consulting the lid, but I have some with pockets for ingredients. I think it might be early for that one. Sorcerers only work with their essence early in their career. He closed the box and placed it back. If he's interested in one of those anyway, it'll be a little more expensive. If you can convince your entire team to shop here, I'll give you a 10% discount. And I'll reduce the interest to 0.5% if you need to take advantage of my payment plan. Tibbs nodded, not mentioning that the man hadn't said how much the robot cost, so he had no idea what a little more expensive meant, or that he had no idea what 1% was, even less half of that. But he already had enough numbers. He already had enough of numbers. I'll have to talk it with them. Talk about it with them. Of course, the man answered with an understanding smile. Come find me, Daran, once you've made your decision. I'm certain you'll find no one offering better prices. Tip stepped outside and squinted to stop the pain the sunlight added to what he was already feeling. How could talking and thinking about numbers be so painful? And this concludes chapter 17 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next one's going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you are interested in reading the story, it is up on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me and read ahead, we're about 9 chapters ahead at this time. You can do that on Patreon. And should you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. Links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.